The great crystal halls of Desert Prime stretched toward the purple sky like frozen flames, and inside those halls, 2,000 species had gathered to celebrate 300 years of galactic peace. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood among them, wearing the simple blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, and she felt very small. The beings around her towered and glowed and shifted through forms that human eyes could barely understand. And every single one of them looked at her with the same expression: contempt. 300 years ago, the Valorian Empire had discovered Earth, a tiny blue world spinning around an unremarkable yellow star in the outer spiral of the galaxy. And they had laughed at what they found humans were: soft creatures made of meat and water, with no natural armor and no claws and no venom. And they lived for less than a century before their bodies simply stopped working. They could not speak through the quantum lattice that connected all advanced minds across the stars. And they could not bend light or matter with their thoughts. And they could not even survive in the vacuum of space without wrapping themselves in metal shells. The Valorians had named them a Category 7 primitive species, which was the lowest designation the Galactic Concord had ever created. And for 300 years, humanity had lived with that shame. Elena watched as the delegates from 1,000 worlds mingled and laughed, and made deals that would shape the future of entire star systems. And none of them even glanced in her direction. A shadow fell over her, and she looked up to see Ambassador Kethvar, the delegate from the Kethvari Hive Collective, and his compound eyes glittered with amusement. He stood nearly 3 meters tall on 6 segmented legs, and his iridescent wings folded against his back like sheets of living metal. And when he spoke, his mandibles clicked in a rhythm that her translators struggled to process. "Little Earth creature," he said, and his voice buzzed with poorly hidden mockery. "I am surprised you came to this celebration. For what exactly are you celebrating?" Elena kept her face neutral, and she had learned long ago that showing emotion only made them laugh harder. 300 years of peace," she replied, and her voice was steady even though her hand wanted to shake. "Humanity values peace above all things." Kethvar made a sound that might have been laughter, and his wings rustled with contempt. "Peace," he repeated. "Yes, I suppose even pets can appreciate peace, for it means their masters are content and will not kick them." Other delegates had gathered now, drawn by the familiar entertainment of mocking the human. And Elena recognized the shifting light forms of the Erosion Collective and the crystalline bodies of the Zasari and the towering golden figures of the Valorians themselves. The Erosion dimmed their luminescence when they noticed her, which was their way of showing that something was beneath their attention. And the Dasari made musical sounds that her translator identified as amusement at primitive creatures. Elena stood her ground, and she thought of her grandmother, who had stood in halls like this and endured the same mockery, and she thought of her mother, who had smiled through 1,000 insults and never once fought back. 300 years of humiliation, and humanity had never raised its voice in anger. The Valorian High Ambassador approached, and his name was Vorath, and he was perhaps the most beautiful being Elena had ever seen, with golden skin that seemed to glow from within and eyes like pools of liquid amber. But his beauty hid a cruelty that Elena had learned to recognize. And when he smiled at her, she saw the predator behind the pretty face. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, and his voice was smooth and warm and completely false. "I am so pleased you could attend, for I have wonderful news for humanity." The crowd grew quiet, and Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach, because wonderful news from the Valorians was never wonderful for anyone else. "The Valorian Empire has decided to expand," Vorath announced, and his voice carried across the crystal hall. "We require additional territory for our growing population, and we have identified the perfect location." He paused, and his amber eyes fixed on Elena with something that looked almost like pity Earth's colony moons, he said. All 3 of them. And the humans currently residing there will be relocated to reservation zones on their homeworld. The crowd murmured with approval. And no one objected, because who would object to taking something from humans? Elena felt her heart pounding in her chest. But she kept her face calm, and she spoke in a voice that did not shake. Those colonies hold 4 million human lives, she said. You cannot simply relocate them like cargo. Vorath's smile widened. And it was not a kind smile. Cannot, he repeated. As if the word amused him. Little human, you seem to forget your place. For your species exists in this galaxy only because we allow it. And we can remove that allowance at any moment. He stepped closer, and his golden form loomed over her like a statue of a cruel god. Be grateful that we are relocating your people instead of simply eliminating them, he said. It would be so much easier, and no one in this hall would care. Elena looked around at the assembled delegates, at the hundreds of eyes and sensors and perception organs that watched her humiliation. And she knew he was right. No one would care if humanity vanished tomorrow. But Elena knew something that Vorath did not know. Something that the entire galaxy had failed to notice for 300 years. She thought of the facility beneath the Antarctic ice, where her grandmother had worked, and her mother had worked, and where she herself had spent 15 years before becoming a diplomat. And she thought of what waited there in the darkness. Project Prometheus. 300 years of secret work, hidden beneath a mask of submission and humility. And the galaxy had never suspected a thing. Elena looked up at Vorath, at his golden perfection and his cruel smile. And she spoke words that would echo through history. I understand, she said. And her voice was soft and humble and perfectly submissive. Humanity will comply with the Valorian decision. Vorath nodded with satisfaction. And the crowd lost interest and returned to their celebrations. And no one noticed the tiny smile that flickered across Elena's face. They had mocked Earth for 3 centuries. They had called humans primitive and weak and worthless, and they had never once wondered what humanity might be doing while they laughed. Elena left the crystal hall and walked alone through the purple twilight of Thesser Prime. And she activated the secure communicator hidden in her collar. Geneva, she said. It is time, for they have finally given us no choice on Earth. In a facility that did not officially exist. Alarms began to sound. 300 years of preparation were about to end. And the galaxy was about to learn that they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. 300 years before Elena Vasquez stood in the crystal halls of Thesser Prime. A young woman named Maria Santos stood in a very different room and made a decision that would change the fate of humanity. The year was 2542, and the Valorians had arrived on Earth just 12 months earlier. And they had brought with them gifts and technology and promises of friendship. They had also brought contempt. Maria was 23 years old, and she was one of the brightest physicists on Earth. And she had been chosen to study the alien technology that the Valorians had so graciously shared with humanity. But Maria was not stupid. And she noticed things that the Valorians did not want her to notice. She noticed that the technology they gave humanity was always slightly broken. Always just limited enough to keep humans dependent on Valorian help. And she noticed that the Valorians watched humans the way a farmer might watch cattle, with calculation, not kindness, on the night that would birth Project Prometheus. Maria gathered 11 other scientists in a basement laboratory in Geneva, and she showed them what she had discovered. The quantum lattice, she said, pointing to equations that covered every wall. The Valorians use it for communication and travel and 100 other things. And they say humans cannot access it because our brains are too primitive. The other scientists nodded. Because this was common knowledge. Because this was what the Valorians had told them. They are lying, Maria said. She pulled up a new set of equations. And the room went silent. The quantum lattice is real, and we cannot naturally access it. But that is not because we are primitive, Maria explained. It is because the lattice is just one force among many. And the Valorians have built their entire civilization around exploiting that single force while ignoring 11 others. She drew a diagram that would later become famous throughout human history. A circle divided into 12 equal sections, like a clock. There are 12 fundamental forces in the universe. She said, the galaxy has mastered one of them. And they think that one force is everything. But they are wrong. And we are going to master the other 11. That night, Project Prometheus was born. For the first 50 years, the project existed in secret, hidden beneath the ice of Antarctica in a facility that no satellite could detect and no alien sensor could find. The world's governments pretended to squabble and fight. But beneath the surface, they were united by a single purpose. And that purpose was survival. Humanity sent its brightest minds into the frozen darkness. And those minds worked and struggled and failed and tried again. And slowly, impossibly, they began to succeed. Dr. James Chun discovered the second force in 2589, an energy that could bend space like folding paper. And he called it the Prometheus wave in honor of the project that had given him purpose. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo discovered the third and fourth forces in 2612, twin energies that could manipulate matter at the atomic level. And she used them to build machines that could repair themselves and grow and evolve. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's grandmother discovered the fifth force in 2641, a frequency that resonated with human consciousness itself. And that discovery would eventually become the foundation of the Athena network. Generation after generation of scientists lived and died in that frozen facility. And they passed their knowledge to their children. And their children passed it to their grandchildren. And the work never stopped above the ice. Humanity played its role perfectly. They were humble and grateful and completely submissive. And they accepted every restriction the Concord placed upon them. And they never complained when other species mocked them or insulted them or took their resources. The Valorians limited humanity to 3 colony moons. And humanity thanked them for their generosity. The Kethvari demanded that human ships be tracked at all times. And humanity agreed without protest. The Erosian Collective declared that humans were too primitive to participate in galactic politics. And humanity bowed its head and accepted the judgment. And all the while, beneath the Antarctic ice, the work continued. By the year 2700. Project Prometheus had mapped all 12 fundamental forces, and they had begun building technologies that would make the galaxy's most advanced civilizations look like children playing with sticks. The Prometheus engine could fold space across any distance, making the galaxy's fastest ships look like crawling insects. The Athena network could link human minds together into a single consciousness, creating a unity that no hive species had ever achieved. And the Ares protocol contained weapons so terrible that the scientists who created them wept at what they had made. But humanity did not use these gifts. They waited. Elena's grandmother, Dr. Sofia Vasquez, spent 40 years working on the Prometheus engine before she finally spoke the words that would become the project's motto. We could reveal ourselves now, she told the council that governed the facility. We could show the galaxy what we have become, and we could take our revenge for 3 centuries of humiliation. She paused, and her old eyes were filled with something that the younger scientists did not understand. But we will not, she said, because power without wisdom is just destruction. And we must earn the right to wield what we have created. The council debated for 7 days, and in the end, they agreed Project Prometheus would continue in secret, and humanity would continue to endure the galaxy's contempt. And they would wait until they were certain, absolutely certain, that they could be trusted with the power they had claimed decades past. And Sophia died, and her daughter Maria took her place. And Maria's daughter, Elena, grew up in the frozen facility surrounded by technologies that could reshape reality itself. Elena learned to smile at aliens who called her primitive. She learned to bow her head to creatures who saw her as an animal, and she learned to wait. Because her grandmother had taught her that patience was humanity's greatest weapon. When Elena left the facility to become a diplomat, she carried a secret in her heart. And that secret gave her strength. Through every humiliation and every insult and every moment of contempt, the galaxy thought they were mocking a primitive species. They had no idea they were poking a sleeping giant, and now, 300 years after Maria Santos had stood in a basement in Geneva and decided that humanity would not accept its fate, Elena Vasquez stood in the shadows of Thesser Prime and sent a message to Earth. It is time, in the facility beneath the ice. Alarms sounded and lights blazed to life, and scientists who had trained their entire lives for this moment began to move. 3 centuries of preparation were over. The awakening had begun. The message from Thesser Prime reached Earth in 11 seconds, crossing a distance that should have taken 3 weeks. Because humanity had long ago learned to fold space like paper in Geneva. The United Council of Earth gathered in an emergency session. And for the first time in 300 years, they spoke openly about the thing that had been hidden beneath the ice. General Marcus Chun stood before the assembled leaders. And he was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many years of quiet preparation. The Valorians have announced their intention to seize our colonies and relocate our people to reservations, he said. And his voice was calm, but his hands were steady in the way of a soldier ready for war. This is not a negotiation, and this is not a request, and if we do nothing, 4 million humans will lose their homes and humanity will take another step toward extinction. The council chamber was silent, and every leader present knew what Marcus was about to say. It is time to reveal Project Prometheus. Dr. Yuki Tanaka rose from her seat, and she was small and old, and her hair was white as Antarctic snow. But her eyes burned with an intensity that made younger people look away. She had spent 60 years working on the Athena network, continuing the work her grandmother had begun, and she knew its power better than anyone alive. We have options, she said, and she activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber with light. The Ares Protocol gives us weapons that could destroy the Valorian Empire in a matter of hours, and we could reduce their homeworld to ash before they even understood what was happening. The display showed simulations of terrible destruction, of golden Valorian cities burning and Valorian ships shattering like glass. And the council watched in silence. But that would make us monsters, Yuki continued. And it would unite the entire galaxy against us. And even with our power, we cannot fight 2,000 species at once. She changed the display, and now it showed something different. Something that looked like a web of light spreading across the stars. The Athena network offers another path, she said. We can link human minds together into a single consciousness. And we can project the consciousness across the galaxy. And we can make every sentient being in the Concord feel what we feel. General Chun frowned, and his military mind struggled to understand. Feel what we feel, he repeated. How is that a weapon? Yuki smiled. And it was not a gentle smile. Have you ever wondered why the galaxy fears us despite calling us primitive? She asked. Have you ever wondered why they mock us so loudly and so constantly, as if they are trying to convince themselves that we are nothing? She pulled up historical records, countless documents from countless species, and they all said the same thing in different ways. They sense something in us that they do not understand, Yuki said. A fire that burns in human hearts, a refusal to accept defeat. a stubbornness that survives every setback and every loss and every humiliation. She looked around the chamber at the leaders of a species that had endured 3 centuries of contempt. Without breaking, "The galaxy laughs at us because they are afraid of us," she said. "And when the Athena Network shows them exactly what we are, when they feel our resolve and our determination and our absolute refusal to surrender, they will understand that fear." The debate lasted 6 hours, and voices rose and fell, and arguments crashed against each other like waves. But in the end, the council voted unanimously. They would not use the Ares Protocol. They would not destroy their enemies. They would show them the truth. The message went out to every human on Earth and every human on the colony moons. And it was simple and direct. Humanity faces extinction, and we have the power to save ourselves, but we need your help. And we are asking you to link your mind to the Athena Network voluntarily, to become part of something greater than yourself, to show the galaxy what humanity truly is. No one was forced, and no one was threatened. And the choice belonged to every individual. 8 billion humans on Earth heard the message. 4 million humans on the colonies heard the message, and in the hours that followed, 97.3% of humanity chose to link. Children and elders and soldiers and artists and scientists and farmers. They opened their minds to the network and felt themselves becoming part of something vast and powerful and unstoppable. At precisely midnight, the Athena Network activated Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood at the center of the Antarctic facility, surrounded by machines that hummed with energies the galaxy had never imagined. And she felt the consciousness of 8 billion humans flowing through her. It was overwhelming, and it was beautiful, and it was terrifying. She felt their anger. 3 centuries of humiliation compressed into a single moment. She felt their fear, the knowledge that everything depended on what happened next, and beneath the anger and the fear, she felt something else: hope, stubborn, defiant, unbreakable hope. The network reached out across the stars, and it touched every mind in the galaxy on Nesser Prime. The crystal halls went silent as 2,000 species felt something wash over them like a wave on the Valorian homeworld. Emperor Vorath fell from his golden throne as a presence invaded his consciousness on the Kethvari hive world. Billions of insects stopped moving simultaneously as their collective mind encountered something it could not process across the galaxy. In ships and stations and cities and worlds beyond counting, every sentient being felt the same thing: humanity, not the weak and primitive species they had mocked for centuries, not the subservient pets they had dismissed and ignored, but something else entirely. They felt 300 years of quiet endurance. They felt generations of scientists working in frozen darkness. They felt the love of parents for children, and they dreams of the young and the wisdom of the old. And they felt resolve, an iron determination that could not be broken by mockery or contempt or cruelty, a promise that said, "We will survive, and we will endure, and nothing you do will ever stop us." The pulse lasted only 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds changed the galaxy forever. When it ended, the Athena Network went quiet, and 8 billion humans opened their eyes and discovered that they were crying in the Antarctic facility. Yuki Tanaka collapsed into her chair and laughed and wept at the same time. "It worked," she whispered. "They felt us, and now they know." On Nesser Prime, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the crystal halls among 2,000 species who stared at her with something new in their eyes. Not contempt, not mockery, fear. The Valorian High Ambassador Vorath approached her on shaking legs, and his golden skin had gone pale, and his amber eyes were wide with shock. "What are you?" he whispered. "What are you really?" Elena smiled, and for the first time in 300 years, she did not bow her head. "We are humanity," she said, "and we have been waiting for you to ask that question for a very long time." The galaxy held its breath in the hours following the Athena pulse. Chaos spread across 2,000 worlds as species struggled to understand what they had experienced. The Kethvari Hive Queen lay in a medical chamber on her homeworld, surrounded by doctors who could not explain why she had collapsed. And her compound eyes stared at nothing as she replayed the human consciousness in her mind. Again and again, the Erosion Collective, beings of pure energy who had never known fear, dimmed their light for 6 hours as they processed emotions they had never felt before. And on the Valorian homeworld, Emperor Vorath screamed at his admirals to attack Earth immediately, to destroy the humans before they could do whatever terrible thing they were planning. But his admirals did not move. They had felt what waited for them on Earth, and they knew that attacking humanity would be like attacking a star on Nesser Prime. The Galactic Concord convened an emergency session, and every delegate demanded answers that no one could provide. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood calmly at her station, waiting. The Valorian delegation demanded her arrest for psychic assault on the Concord, but no one moved to enforce that demand, because everyone in the chamber remembered what they had felt. And no one wanted to touch the woman who had somehow channeled the consciousness of an entire species. Ambassador Vasquez, the Zari Arbiter, said, and his crystalline voice trembled in a way that had never happened before. "You will explain what just occurred." Elena smiled, and it was not the humble smile she had worn for 300 years. "Certainly," she said. "But first, I believe we are expecting a guest." The crystal walls of the chamber rippled, and alarms began to sound, and every delegate turned to see something impossible appearing in the space above Nesser Prime. A ship. It was small, barely the size of a Valorian shuttle, but its hull shimmered with energies that no species in the Concord could identify. The ship had not used a jump gate. It had not traveled through the quantum lattice. It had simply appeared, crossing a distance of 3 weeks and 11 minutes. Captain James Okonkwo broadcast a single message from the bridge of the UES Defiance. Humanity requests the floor. Okonkwo broadcast a single message from the bridge of the UES Defiance. Humanity requests the floor. The silence in the Concord chamber was absolute. Ambassador Kethvar was the first to speak, and his mandibles clicked with something that might have been hysteria. "That is impossible," he said. "The quantum lattice is the only method of faster-than-light travel, and humans cannot access the quantum lattice, and therefore that ship cannot exist." Elena turned to face him, and her eyes held a patience that came from 3 centuries of preparation. "Ambassador Kethvar," she said, "the quantum lattice is one method of faster-than-light travel, one of 12, and we have mastered 8 of them so far." The chamber erupted in chaos, but Elena raised her hand and the noise stopped, because everyone remembered the pulse, and everyone knew that they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. "For 300 years," Elena began, and her voice carried to every corner of the crystal hall, "you call this primitive, and you mocked our biology, and you restricted our growth, and you planned our extinction." She paused and looked at Vorath, who stood among the Valorian delegation with a face that had gone pale as bone. "We let you," she said. She activated a holographic display, and the chamber filled with images of technologies that made the Concord's most advanced achievements look like children's toys. "Project Prometheus," Elena explained. 300 years of secret research conducted beneath the ice of our homeworld. 300 years of our brightest minds working in darkness. While you laughed at us above, the display showed the Prometheus engine, a device that could fold space across any distance. It showed the Athena network, the system that had just touched every mind in the galaxy, and it showed the Aris protocol, weapons so terrible that even the holographic representations made several delegates back away in fear. "We could have revealed this at any time," Elena said, We could have demanded equality, or threatened destruction, or simply conquered you all. Because we have the power to do exactly that. She let the words sink in, watching the fear spread across the chamber. But we did not, she continued. Because power without wisdom is just destruction. And we wanted to be sure we could trust ourselves with what we had created. Vorth stepped forward, and his golden features twisted with desperate arrogance. This is a bluff, he declared. You cannot possibly have developed technology beyond the Concord in secret. And even if you did, you are still one species against 2,000. And we will crush you. Elena looked at him with something almost like pity. Captain Okonkwo, she said into her communicator, please provide a demonstration above Thesser Prime. The U's Defiance turned toward a small asteroid that drifted at the edge of the system. A beam of light touched the asteroid, and the asteroid ceased to exist, not exploded, not shattered, just gone, as if it had never been. The Defiance had erased it from reality in the chamber. Ambassador Kethver made a sound that his species made only when facing certain death. That was a pebble. Elena said quietly, a rock smaller than this building. And we could do the same to your homeworld, Ambassador Varth. And we could do it before your fleet even knew we were there. Varith's face had gone from pale to gray, and he looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. What do you want? He whispered. Conquest, revenge, what? Elena shook her head slowly. We want recognition, she said. Full membership in the Concord with equal rights and equal voice. And we want the right to expand beyond our 3 tiny moons. And we want one more thing. She looked around the chamber at the delegates who had spent 3 centuries treating her species like animals. Every species that mocked us. Every species that restricted us. Every species that planned our genocide. She said, you will apologize. Publicly and sincerely. The chamber was silent. And then, Elena continued, and her voice softened. We will forgive you. Ambassador Kethver made a choking sound. Forgive us, he repeated. As if he could not understand the words. You have the power to destroy us all. And you want forgiveness. Elena smiled. And it was a smile that contained 300 years of suffering, and 300 years of patience, and 300 years of hope. That is what humans do, she said. We endure, and we survive, and we forgive. Because hatred is easy, but forgiveness is hard. And we have always chosen the hard path. She turned to face the entire Concord. Every species that had ever called humanity primitive or weak or worthless. We could burn the galaxy down, she said. We have earned that right, and no one could stop us. But we choose instead to build something better. She extended her hand toward Varth, toward the man who had announced humanity's relocation just hours before. The question is not what we will do, she said. The question is what you will do, and whether you will meet us as enemies or as friends. Varth stared at her hand as if it was a weapon. And in a way, it was the most dangerous weapon humanity had ever created, the offer of peace. 1 year had passed since the Athena pulse shook the galaxy, and everything had changed. The Galactic Concord had ratified what they called the Terran Accords, a document that recognized humanity not merely as equals, but as something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had gained ultimate power and chosen mercy on Earth. The changes were visible everywhere, as ships from 100 worlds descended on the planet that had once been called primitive and worthless. The Kethvari sent scholars to study human history, trying to understand how a species so fragile had developed such iron will. The Dasari sent artists to learn human music and literature and dance, fascinated by the creativity that flowed from human minds. Even the Erosian Collective, beings of pure energy who had once dimmed their light in contempt, now blazed brilliant in human presence. honoring the fire they had felt during the Athena Pulse. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood on the steps of the United Nations building in Geneva, watching the streams of alien visitors flowing through streets that had once known only human footsteps. Her communicator chimed, and she smiled when she saw the message. It was time. The ceremony took place in the Great Plaza before the UN, where a platform had been built from the Sari crystal and Kethvari metal and human wood, a symbol of the new unity that was spreading across the stars. Thousands of humans had gathered to watch, and millions more watched through screens and networks that spanned the globe. And at the center of the platform stood a single figure, Empress Valeth of the Valorian Empire, daughter of the man who had announced humanity's relocation just 1 year before. She was beautiful in the way all Valorians were beautiful, with golden skin and amber eyes and features that seemed carved from light itself. But her eyes held something her father's eyes had never held: humility. I come before humanity today to speak words that my people should have spoken 3 centuries ago, Valeth said, and her voice carried across the plaza and across the world and across the stars. Through the quantum lattice that now welcomed human thoughts, the Valorian Empire was wrong. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Elena felt her heart beating faster. We discovered Earth 300 years ago, and we saw a species that could not access the quantum lattice, that lived in bodies of flesh and blood, that died after less than a century, Valeth continued. And we decided that this meant you were inferior. She paused, and her amber eyes glistened with what might have been tears. We were fools. The plaza was silent. We saw your weakness and never noticed your strength, Valeth said. We saw your fragility and never noticed your resilience. We saw your short lives and never noticed how much you accomplished in those brief years. She stepped forward, and slowly, carefully, she lowered herself to her knees before the human crowd. The Valorian Empire mocked humanity, she said. We restricted your growth. We took your resources. We planned your extinction, and we did all of this because we were afraid of what we did not understand. She bowed her head until her golden hair touched the platform. I am sorry, she said. On behalf of my people and my ancestors, and all the generations who should have known better, I am sorry. The silence stretched for a long moment, and then Elena stepped forward. She walked across the platform until she stood before the kneeling Empress, and she looked down at the woman who represented everything that had hurt humanity for 3 centuries, and she reached out her hand. Rise, she said. Valeth looked up, and her eyes were wide with surprise. Rise, Elena repeated, because the past is over and the future is waiting, and we have work to do together. The Empress took Elena's hand and stood, and the crowd erupted in cheers that echoed from the plaza to the stars. Later that day, in a quiet garden behind the UN building, Elena met with Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who had traveled from the Antarctic facility for the ceremony. They sat together on a bench beneath a cherry tree, watching the sun set over a world that had finally found its place among the stars. There is something I never told the council, Yuki said, and her old voice was soft with wonder. Something I felt during the Athena Pulse. Elena turned to look at her, curious. When we reached out to the galaxy, when we showed them what humanity truly is, Yuki continued, I felt them reaching back. Not all of them, but dozens of species. Maybe hundreds. She paused, searching for words. They felt our resolve, our refusal to surrender, and they recognized it, she said, because they had felt the same thing themselves, buried deep beneath the cultures that told them to obey and submit and accept their place in the hierarchy. Elena understood. Hope, she said. Yuki nodded. We did not just show the galaxy what humanity is, she said. We showed them what they could be, and now they are watching us, waiting to see if we can actually build the future we promised. Elena thought about the challenges that lay ahead, the treaties to negotiate, and the technologies to share. and the centuries of mistrust to overcome. Then we should not disappoint them, she said 1 month later. Elena stood on the observation deck of the U.S. Hope, humanity's first intergalactic vessel. Behind her, Earth hung in the void like a blue jewel. The tiny world that had refused to accept its fate. Ahead, a new galaxy waited, full of species who had never heard of Earth or the Concord or the 3 centuries of humiliation that had forged humanity into something unbreakable. A young Valorian officer approached, her golden features nervous with a question she had been trying to ask for days. "Ambassador," she said, "may I ask you something personal?" Elena smiled gently. "Of course." The officer hesitated, then spoke. "During the dark centuries, when my people treated you so cruelly and so carelessly," she said. "Did you ever hate us?" Elena considered the question carefully, because it deserved an honest answer. "Every day," she admitted. "There were moments when I wanted nothing more than to see your golden cities burn and your people suffer as we had suffered." The officer winced. But Elena was not finished. "But we also understood you," she continued. "You were afraid of what you did not understand, and fear makes people cruel. And we knew that revenge would only create more fear and more cruelty." She gestured toward the stars that waited beyond the viewport. "We chose a harder path," she said. "The path of patience and forgiveness and hope. And now that path has led us here, to the edge of a new galaxy, with former enemies standing beside us as allies." The officer nodded slowly, and her amber eyes held something that looked like the beginning of wisdom. "And now," she asked, "what happens next?" Elena Vasquez smiled, the smile of a woman who had endured 3 centuries of contempt and emerged stronger than anyone had ever imagined. "Now," she said, "we walk the path together. And we show the universe what happens when creatures who were meant to be enemies choose to be friends." The U.S. Hope turned toward the unknown stars, carrying humans and Valorians and Kethvori and the Sari and a dozen other species into a future that none of them could have imagined alone behind them. Earth grew small and distant, a tiny blue world that had changed the galaxy forever, not through conquest or destruction or revenge, but through something far more powerful, through the simple, stubborn, unbreakable human refusal to give up and across the stars. In 1,000 worlds and 1,000,000 minds, the fire that humanity had sparked continued to spread, the fire of hope, the fire of change, the fire of a new dawn rising. They had mocked Earth for centuries. Now they followed Earth toward the future. And the future was brighter than anyone had ever dreamed.